Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome. My name is Beatriz Cantada. I'm the Director of Engagement in the Institute Community and Equity Office, also known as ICEO. Before we begin, I have a few acknowledgements. I'd like to thank my programming team, Paulina Wolf, Molly McInerney, and Alejandro Ramos for having this event organized and scheduled for all of you. I'd like to also thank our AV team. We have Amelia from Audiovisual and Barry from MIT Video Productions. We have them here to create a hybrid environment for everyone, and also a recording will be available in a couple of weeks, so check out our website. I'd like to thank our senior leadership support, Provost Cindy Barnhart, Vice President for Equity and Inclusion Carl Reed, and Associate Provost Paula Hammond. I want to acknowledge our colleagues at Lincoln Lab who are joining us virtually. Our faculty hosts, we have Professor Janelle Knox-Hayes and Professor Chris Zegras. Also want to acknowledge faculty members from DUSP and Cesar McDowell, who's joining us in person. We have scholars joining us both in person and virtual: Christine Taylor Butler, Janine Dawkins, Maleka Mogosi, Leslie Jonas, and Justin Wilkerson. So good to see you all. I also want to acknowledge that when we have scholars join us at MIT, they have family members, loved ones that are also impacted by their decision to come here. So I want to acknowledge our presenters' family members, Elizabeth and Donna, who are joining us virtually. Thank you again for lending us your brother or son. So thank you again. I also want to acknowledge our Indigenous community members joining us virtually and in person. And in person, I see Nina Litton. Thank you for joining us. Anyone else, and any of our Indigenous community members in this space? Thank you so much, Maria. Yes, thank you for joining us. Welcome. Note, we will be recording this session. And also, please stay muted during the presentation. There will be an opportunity in the last 10-15 minutes for a Q&A, so we will also monitor the chat function for any questions, comments. Live captioning is available. You will note that there are QR codes on your table. So these are for folks joining us in person, QR codes. We invite you to complete this post-event survey to help us improve our programs. So again, and also we'll share this information with the presenter. And Paulina will actually be posting the link to the post-event survey, so please complete it. For our next presentation, please subscribe to our newsletter, ico.mit.edu, to hear more about our events and our upcoming presentation. Right now, our next one is on April 1st, and that's with Morgan Koenig. About our presenter. Jean-Luc Pierite, Tonica Biloxi Tribe of Louisiana, is an MLK scholar at the Department of Urban Studies and Planning, president of the North American Indian Center of Boston, NAICOB, and the founder of IndigiFab, with areas of focus in supporting distributed networks for education, public policy advocacy for social justice, and supporting philanthropic foundations. Based on over 50-year organizational history, Jean-Luc carries forward NAICOB's values in fundraising and liaising with community organizations and government agencies. Jean-Luc also serves on the Black Massachusetts Coalition Executive Committee, in which he advocates for racial and economic justice through targets for public and private sectors. Jean-Luc also serves on the Community Advisory Group for the Nellie Mae Education Foundation, supporting K-12 students and BIPOC-led organizations. Jean-Luc has earned a master's in design for emergent futures from the Institut de Arquitectura Avanzada de Catalunya in Barcelona, Spain. He also earned a Bachelor of Arts in Humanities with a co-major in Mass Communication and Japanese from Dillard University in New Orleans, Louisiana. Jean-Luc also earned an Associates of Science in Video Game Design from Full Sail University in Orlando, Florida. Join me in welcoming Jean-Luc Pierite.
Thank you, Beatrice. Oh, okay. I'm coming in through the speaker, so that's good. That's a good sign. The title of my talk today is Planning in the Native Slipstream. And I wanted to, what was meaningful for me to start off this presentation was reflecting on the 55th annual National Day of Mourning. Over the past year, our community has, the Indigenous community of New England, we've we've had a lot of challenges. We've kind of come to frame this time as sort of the back end of the pandemic. We see a lot, still see cases within our communities. We still see illness, and we're very much impacted. And so at times, you know, as a team, as a community, individually, we are just all very, very stretched. And it was within this context that we were going into the 55th commemoration of an undelivered speech by Wampanoag activist Frank Wamsutta James. And this day, as we were getting closer and closer, we were seeing the weather reports, we were seeing the rain, we were seeing the wind, we were seeing the cold, and an action that would draw maybe thousands from across New England, but also New York City. And also, I mean, that's just the bus lines. We have people that come from outside of the country to attend this event. We thought that those numbers would not show up because of all the conditions, but we were still intent on having this important event. And so, as North American Indian Center of Boston, we were asked to co-chair the event, and we were asked to open the event with just honoring and welcoming the rain, welcoming the waters, because so for many of our Native peoples, we say that water is life. At that time, we were sending up prayers for the people in Gaza that needed clean water to survive the time. And also here in Massachusetts, we're going through a drought. And so yes, we welcome the water, we welcome the cold, and we just welcome life. And so we heard from different Indigenous activists. We heard from Chali Inaru, who is a Taino mother. She introduced Herbie Waters, who followed his grandfather in a tradition of reading a letter from then incarcerated Leonard Peltier, and the crowds cheered out, "Free Leonard Peltier." And the Red Nation joined us on stage with activists from the Palestinian youth movement to kind of deliver a vision for a liberated future for all Indigenous peoples. And so it was a successful event, and we were able to confront these monuments to colonization, to dispossession, to the disappearing Indigenous peoples. We were able to show our resistance to what was enshrined through our actions. And so now we're in a completely new world. But while there are many, many challenges ahead, you know, the answer for Free Leonard Peltier has been sent. The answer for a ceasefire in Gaza has been sent. And so we just kind of just take in those moments. We start as Indigenous peoples, we start by recognizing the land and First Peoples, and this vision board is something that I worked on over the pandemic in a workshop with one of our partner organizations, Gadakina. I was able to take different historical sketches through text, a historical portraiture of First Peoples, but then that wasn't enough. What was important from that exercise, as was relayed to me by Judy Dow Gadakina, was what is our personal connection to land? And so that led me to reflect on my walks around Jamaica Pond, and when I saw the sunset rising over the first swan, coming from the winter going into the spring, looking at different pieces of art within the landscape, and looking at, again, these monuments to dispossession, thinking about how this Francis Parkman monument here, now Francis Parkman isn't the prominent person in the relief, Francis Parkman is the bust on the on this relief here. This person is just a composite, a fantasy character of an Indigenous person. But at that time in 2020, you can see that local activists were able to impose and show resistance through their own sort of like this ephemeral, like the graffiti art that's here. Yes, that can be washed away, but in this moment, you can see resistance to all of the things that, you know, perpetuate systemic injustices. So thinking about land, thinking about connection to land, thinking about going beyond not just getting the facts right about who are the first people here, you know, how long have people been here, but really asking the questions of who are we? Who are our ancestors? What is the knowledge that we represent? What are the institutions and governments that we represent? And I really, this week I found that within the snow, but not the snow that we see outside over the Charles River, but the snow that, the lake effect snow that has now covered New Orleans. I had a call with my Nanan, Stephanie Eskide, and she said that there were 10 inches of snow within our yard in Norco outside of New Orleans. And to see these things, to see this revitalization of earthen mound works, Nani Babancha, which is on the Jean-Luc Pierite Parkway and managed by Prospect NOLA, which Denise Fraser, shout out to Denise Fraser, one of our former MLK scholars, is now a programming director for Prospect NOLA. But also to see this statue of Joan of Arc standing and snow-covered. And really these few lines here, rearing back on her steed. Joan represents the strength, power, and perseverance of New Orleans, a city that no foe may defeat. Such a beautiful moment in the snow because, first of all, I come from New Orleans. We see one fall of snow, flake of snow fall from the sky, the whole city shuts down. Imagine what they do with 10 inches. There are snowball fights in the French Quarter. There's like, you know, we go and our resilience is within revelry. Our resilience is within the music. Our resilience is within the culture. And yes, to think about the darkness that started this year, the attack on Bourbon Street that 14 people lost their lives, you know, now to see these moments and to see that embodied within a statue of a French saint, you know, and to know that we cannot be defeated, whether it's weather, whether it's a terrorist attack, we will always be who we are. And so this is how I found myself in the snow this past week. I also talk about systems of value, talking about, you know, this example from my own tribal history. These medals from the King of Spain. So, you know, in the late 18th century, we would go back and forth between the colonial powers because we were positioned along the Mississippi River. We would parlay with the Spanish, you know, be awarded medals and ribbons and all this stuff, then go to the French and then, you know, and then get their medals and ribbons and titles and all of this stuff and try to like negotiate international relationships that way. I contrast that with systems that are cultivated here within the Northeast, the wampum belts, in which each of these beads are handmade through quahog shells and then encoded into these belts, the purple and white beads. There's meaning that's encoded in this. There is agreements, there's between communities, between nations, all of that together. And it takes the whole community to make each of these beads. So there's value that's generated from the grassroots versus top down through imperialism, colonialism, and so forth. And I like this quote from Angela Haas in Wampum as hypertext, thinking about how this is an alternative genealogy to the hypertext that we currently see across the World Wide Web. But thinking about that, we then take those same shells and think about the shell middens that are endangered on the coast of Maine, middens that are going under conservation efforts, people coming together and trying to save this because there are thousands of years of history that are stored within these shell middens in terms of cultural objects and just meaning that's embedded within the land. All of that needs to be preserved. But thinking about those same quahog shells, here is the hardware where we store data, and here is an implementation where we are encoding data through this sort of binary logic of the purple and white beads. And then even going back to that example of Nani Balbancha, which is now covered in snow, the building of that, folks from the Homa Language Project, they are here pictured burying their dictionary within the mound itself. And so there is a process of taking all of their language and using it to actually heal the lands within New Orleans. So a lot of the methodologies that I apply when I'm talking about these things, I'm really gravitating towards indigenous futurisms, and I blend that with the future scouting that I did through my master's program at IAC, or the Institut d'Architecture Avançada de Catalunya. Good Catalan there. But here on the left, you see some examples of cards from the Atlas of Weak Signals that was developed over at IAC. I take that future scouting method and then remix it and contextualize it with genres of indigenous futurism that are curated in this collection, Walking the Clouds by Grace Dillon, an Anishinaabe scholar. And of course, most relevant to today's talk is native slipstream, nonlinear thinking about space-time, navigating past, presents, and futures in one stream, everything happening all at once. Looking at the landscape and knowing that the waters that are there, waters can come from the stars. Waters can be older than the sun. I'm looking back at time. I'm feeling different things when I feel the earth, or when I feel brick in buildings on the French Quarter. Like, I can go back in time. I can have that perception. For indigenous peoples, so many different things, even in this present moment, whether I am looking forward for generations or looking back for generations. It's all here within this moment. And that's carried forward in the vision of my master's thesis in DigiFab, in which I was talking about acknowledging emergence origins, going back to my story tradition in which our people emerged from an earthen mound. And we sustained balance as future ancestors. And that resonates with Laura Harjo, who writes in Spiral to the Stars, the definition of futurity, the enactment of theories and practices that activate our ancestors' unrealized possibilities, the act of living out the futures we wish for in a contemporary moment. So thinking about even in what my family does through language revitalization, we reach back to the time in which our last fluent speaker was speaking, and then we take the knowledge and we carry it forward, and we think about what would it be for our languages, our cultures to reflect the moment that we're in right now? And living out the futures we wish for this contemporary moment and create the conditions for these futures. So sustaining balance as future ancestors, knowing that what I am doing right now is the act of an ancestor for my descendants generations ahead. So I also reflect on Kyle Mays and his book, City of Dispossessions, and especially his definition of sites of resistance and how Black and Indigenous peoples have resist the logics of dispossession that would kind of in totality take away land, labor, lives from all of our peoples. And how do we do that? By cultivating these sites of resistance. We resist discourses of our own erasure by producing counter-narratives that assert their presence and produce, yes, Nina, I see you right there. This is from it's Orange Shirt Day, thank you very much. And we are on Mission Hill, the Cathedral of the Holy Cross. And we are resisting. Why is everybody here in orange shirts? Why is it important to do this in front of a Catholic church? Because education and organized religion have stolen generations of children from us. And it's important for us to tell these versions of history by getting these stories, not just into the public square through protests, but actually having them taught in public schools, understanding why our students right now are having challenges in public education, is understanding the intergenerational trauma of generations stolen before they were there. And also, it's important, this signage project, which we did, North American Indian Center Boston did in collaboration with Lesley University Community Design Studio, and is now installed on the Rose Kennedy Greenway. Acknowledge and listen. We are doing that counter narrative by framing the landscape of downtown Boston as being on native land. You are able to look through this hole and see, the urban landscape. We're not ceding the city just because, it's not terra nullius, like it's all indigenous land, and it deserves to be framed in this way. So going back to Kyle Mays, he continues with his definition of sites of resistance. In order to challenge pageants, memorializations of dispossession, we produce expressive culture, including protest art, performance, and music. And I take my experience with the Carnival Society of Boston. Last year on January 6th, which is Epiphany, which is the start of the carnival season in New Orleans, we worked with Revolutionary Spaces to open up the Old South Meeting House. Now, this is a place that enslaved people they would come to worship, but they were on the rafters. And Phyllis Wheatley was one of the people that actually worshiped there. We took that history and we brought the ancestors down from off the rafters. And Sari, our first maid here, actually read On Virtue from the podium right behind where we're standing. So we were able to bring down the spirit of Phyllis Wheatley through a Haitian voice from the rafters of the Old South Meeting House. And then after this, we're carrying all of our parasols because even though it was snowing, it was dark outside, it was time to second line to the Old South Meeting House where the Queen was gonna hold her tea. This is a Black and Indigenous remixing of, some very, very, settler colonial imagery and finery and all of that stuff, but the presence, the survivance, the fact that we're there telling our stories and using these tools to liberate the ancestors and bring out those possibilities. This is the purpose for us being there. And so I wanted to land at talking about one of the things that I'm really proud about here at MIT, here at Department of Urban Studies and Planning. Thank you so much to my faculty hosts, Janelle Knox-Hayes, Chris Segrist, who we gave a shout out to earlier, but also to our teaching team. In 2023, my TA was Jackie Paul. This past fall semester, we had Dina Alexis Darby. But we had Indigenous water and energy planning, emergent futures, and scaling traditional ecological knowledge. A lot of words, but what it really means, just starting with traditional ecological knowledge. Thank you to Leslie Jonas for bringing forward the consciousness of traditional ecological knowledge being knowledge that is developed in place since time immemorial. Like we need to recognize not just the genealogy, but the actual geography of knowledge. And emergent futures, going back to the future scouting, going back to applying Indigenous futurisms. We go through walking the clouds and we go through different case studies. At the same time, our students are exposed to like all these different genres of native Slipstream, native apocalypse, Biscabiang are returning back to ourselves. And so we apply all of these things, and we do so in a way that is not just centering, yes, this book is from an Anishinaabe scholar, but we open this up to a global Indigenous community by bringing in different speakers from across the different regions. So we had activists in chief Watatakalu Yawalepiti from the Alta Xingu region. We had the Eternal Remomo, Alex de Oliveira Silva. We had the Machi Milore Huichila from Mapuche, who has been fighting for the Pilmaican River. We had her family and her community during that talk. And of course, Dr. Jason Santolo, who's Garwa and Barungam from so-called Australia. We had all of these global speakers, well, not just these, but more, coming into our class and telling our students about what is going on in the front lines within their communities. And thank you so much for this past iteration. Josh Flack's former senior advisor for the Center for Constructive Communication at the Media Lab, he joined our class and was able to walk us through his own case studies of the Transportation Self-Governance Program back in 2016 at the Washington State Resource Management Plan. So thinking about intertribal relations, statewide relations, national, federal government to tribe negotiations, all of these different scopes, like how do we work between each other and kind of negotiate, the field is negotiation analysis, but really it's about building relationships. And of course, through the help of our research team, Simone and Salvador, we developed a collective handbook for Indigenous water and energy planning. So all of these different things, like all of the cultural things that everybody from the globe is bringing, like all of these different concepts. It's like, you know, we say like pulling the fire hose and then telling the students to drink from that. Like there's just so much, like, and to be able to like see that curated in a handbook, I was like, oh my goodness, I'm throwing so many concepts. I probably threw so much concepts at you today. Your heads are probably spinning by all of the things that I'm saying. And at first, it was like, good. My first time out, I was like, good. I'm going to confuse you, you're going to unlearn, and then from that foundation, we will you will understand indigeneity. But that was the first time out. The second time out, I was like, no. The real journey is the introspection. Again, going back to those questions, not just thinking about like getting our facts right in terms of land acknowledgements, but when you are coming from a different context, when you have ancestors, when you have knowledge, when you have institutions and governments, all of that behind you, and you go into a different local context, who are you? Who are you? And you are intervening. Like, how are you contributing to the overall story of that different local context? And how are you bringing yourself and all of these things so that people understand and are able to build relationships with you and all that's behind you? So that's it.
Thank you so much, Jean-Luc. We are now ready to take questions. If there's anything in the Zoom chat or in person, please raise your hand and I'll pass the mic to you. Comments, questions?
The heads are still spinning.
I was wondering if you could put Joan of Arc in the context of what you were talking about with, the dispossession that you feel as an Indigenous person.
I think it's so we have. I'm gonna go back to a tool that we have across the Gulf South. This is something that comes up in the Caribbean. This is something that I try to like talk my students through in Indigenous water and energy planning. But we have this technology across Indigenous, Afro-Indigenous, and Creole peoples called syncretism. And so when you say Joan of Arc, you might be thinking of the historical figure, 100 Years' War, Charles VII, and all of this stuff. For me, this is like, a statue of a woman, and it's like, okay, you might see Joan of Arc, but I see other energies. I see other characters that come from my own tradition. And so we have our own ways of like applying our own values. And going back to the example of the Francis Parkman Memorial, right here. So this statue in the monument here, the image, it's identified as a forest Indian within historical sketches. But it took some digging, and I was like, okay, well, maybe because Francis Parkman was writing about different points, and I found Pontiac to be one of the figures. So maybe this is who it could be. So when I'm doing my own sort of like day-to-day walking around the pond and seeing this, I'm starting to be like, okay, this is who this is. It's completely different. Like that's not who that is in reality, but in my reality, in my lens, and how I form my relationship with the landscape and the monument that's there, I'm applying that energy to that, so that I understand like different, like this is I can actually see that this is an Indigenous person, and I can see that he's overlooking the pond. Just like I can see that, the statue was in different points in New Orleans. The statue was looking down from the Riverwalk. Before now, she's now placed. She was put into storage, and now she's placed in the French Square in the French market of the French Quarter. So she's looking out like along the riverside. So thinking about like, what is the river? Like who is the energy that, you know, I'm applying to this? But more so in this example, in this image, like just thinking about how the city of New Orleans, like thinking about the strength, power, and perseverance, like all of those energies being applied locally, goes beyond the figure from the 100 Years' War. Yeah.
Other comments, questions? Wait, I have a couple from Zoom. Okay, what do you think about MIT's decision not to do land acknowledgement because of the lack of consensus about the facts and the subject matter? How would you handle the issue?
It's what I'm constantly saying. Again, you know, I cannot say this enough. That land acknowledgements, like we can very much say, you know, we're going to get up here and we're going to say, you know, something that's very very well researched. You know, I have my sources. I have an image because I have a historical portraiture, but that doesn't say anything about the personal connection to land. Like what is going beyond acknowledgement for Indigenous peoples, what we need to hear is like, okay, but how are you in relationship with Indigenous peoples? I think like, just a plug for the MLK program, I think like just being here and through this program and then understanding like, not just like, what is MIT going to do for me, but the fact that I am here in this time providing support for students through all of the things that they need to go through. Like that's really important. That's about building relationality. So yes, we do have to, we probably, you know, there is an important sort of like ceremonial thing of like having some kind of statement. But if that's not paired up with actions, where does that take us?
Thank you so much. I have one more question virtually before I go back to in person. Okay, thank you, Jean-Luc, for the presentation and to your family for sharing you with us in dusk. Could you say a bit more about the notion of the slipstream and how you see that translating to scholars and practitioners who are planning according to more conventional temporalities and that value progress, development, and task problem-oriented planning? How does one cultivate an awareness of the slipstream in those who may not live these ways?
Yeah, I mean, it's just to kind of put a finer point on, and practically, first of all, the way that we experience time is a little bit different. Not saying like the clock is running funny, you know, like my clock does not run. My clock runs the same way as everybody else. But on practical terms, like the fact that, you know, we have government turnover and grant timelines and all of this stuff. Native peoples have their own form of self-governance. We have our own elections. So we have turnover within our own forms of self-governance. So already, like once a new government comes in, priorities shift. So thinking about like industry partners and other levels of government, like they need to be there needs to be like a little bit of flexibility. And also that relationality piece, like that needs to be built in so that when priorities do shift, like we're still able to kind of find ways to work together. But at the same time, like coming into this, just to kind of get people to understand, you know, my view of the world today, I always felt like I had to kind of walk them through 500 years of history, because my own personal experience coming from my grandparents' generation being the ones that did the research and all of the legwork in terms of getting federal recognition, like all of that history is a part of public record. And so that's all, that's like all ingrained. It astounds me sometimes when people cannot go back to their great grandparents, but I understand, like, there are many different legacies that are attached to that. But as I'm standing here today, like, I'm conscious of, you know, the almost 400 years that this city of Boston has been here on this land, or, you know, going into the 250 years, but also like all of the time immemorial, and also thinking about like all of those generations ahead. All of that temporality is rolling around in our heads while you're trying to say, well, why can't you find time to like work on this grant, right? all of this stuff is up here, and it's not that it's like we're always in the juggle or not always present, but like, you know, there is a very strict Western form of time that flows in a linear fashion. But to be in relationality with us is to understand how time is nonlinear within our perception, and to be able to work with all of that.
Thank you, Jean-Luc. Just a reminder for those with questions virtually, please post it in the chat. We are unable to unmute you and you will not be heard. So it's easier if you post your questions in the chat and I will go ahead and read it. I have an in-person question, but I do want to comment and thank you for the plug for MLK Scholars Program. And I do want to acknowledge we have 2 additional Indigenous scholars this cohort.
Yes.
So Leslie Jonas and Donna Nelson both started January of this year. So again, here's an opportunity. How do we continue to engage with our Indigenous community, whether it's local or nationwide? But just want to point that out. So thank you for that plug.
Yes.
Thank you so much. I'm just really enjoying and appreciating this.
Thank you.
And I'm curious about the role of humor in resistance, and how you think about how humor plays into, or how joy, your own joy, plays into kind of how you show up in the world and how that is resistance. I'm just curious about your thoughts.
Yeah. In previous iterations of the slide deck, I talk about an action that that North American Indian Center Boston did in coalition with other community organizations called Dismantle Now. And what it was in the moment after the murder of George Floyd. And we were in different actions, and we were finding that yes, there's a lot of anger, and rightfully so. And really, like, you know, we need to shut it down, and we need to do this. At the same time, like, where is the space for spirituality? Where is the space for song? Where is the spirit art, even, and yes, humor. So we conceived of this art. We said art action, and, you know, we built a little puppet, which we were like pulling apart on City Hall Plaza, like all the different things that frustrate us, annoy us. Yeah, we were just like, you know, white supremacy, capitalism, like everything. And we're just like pulling this thing apart. But prior to that, you know, bringing in, you know, again, I'm from New Orleans. Bringing in like that imagery of the second line, the funeral procession, that we have to do. We have to like do away with all of these things. So we said, okay, well, you know, I was like, okay, well, it's going to be parasols, and we're going to, you know, spray paint Black Lives Matter on that and go down the streets. And that was perfect because we were starting to realize that we're in COVID. And we needed protection for elders. We needed shade. We needed social distancing, and shade. Like, we're throwing shade on all of this stuff. Like, all of that wordplay, all that playfulness coming out. Like that's what happens when you start to, that's what happens when you start to build in space for joy while you are in the context of resistance. It is joy because, joy as resistance because of the subtler logic of dispossession and totality, saying that, okay, now you are crushed, now you have no place here, now you can't even feel good. Instead of that, we're going to resist that, and we're going to sing, we're going to dance. Last year, we danced together the Dabka, like, we were doing things together because we built in that time for joy and spirituality and humor. Nina.
Laughing. All right, Jean-Luc,
Yes.
I have a question about urban Indian centers. And this is, for background information, this is very important because 8 out of 10 Native Americans live in cities. And there are actually more people who are not enrolled in tribal nations who identify as Native Americans as people who are enrolled. So my personal feeling is that the Intertribal Urban Indian Center is a very important entity in showing the benefits of a different and more collective paradigm of living through art, through culture, and through all the different ways. And I wonder if because you've got a foot on both sides of the river, you're a leader of the North American Indian Center of Boston, familiar with the Boston government, and you are part of our virtual urban intertribal center here at MIT. What are some of the ways that urban intertribal centers can lead cities forward in making a better world for everyone during this period where it's so important to relate for justice making where we can, and maybe give our other efforts a pause.
Yeah. In a couple of hours, I'm going to be going into the City of Boston Commemoration Commission meeting because I serve as one of the co-chairs there. So I'm kind of navigating the spaces in terms of our first 250 revolutionary years, and then politely trying to remind everybody, well, it's a little annoying because your 250 years stands against time immemorial. And I navigate that type of narrative. Thinking about even the fact that I point across the river and 400 years Boston was there. But in Carolyn Crockett's Hacking the Archive class, I think one of the things that we find over at NAICOB is that when we start poking through history and poking through the archives and in our own building, all sorts of surprises come up. We found the first logo of Boston Indian Council that was designed by Philip Young, a Micmac artist. And that first logo included 3 mountains. Why? Because of Tremont, because before the settlers, those 3 mountains were there, and the river is also in the logo. And that is the logo of the Urban Indian Center. Yes, the Urban Indian Center as a response to termination and urban relocation, all of the different things that we were subject to in the 1950s. But this is all native land, like the sign says, right? This is, we can't forget that this is not a bubble of urbanism, and indigeneity is a completely separate thing, in the woods somewhere. We can't just give up the city. We are tied to the land in that way. So, having the Urban Indian Center there, having the 50 years, but then being able to have a community that is, yes, living away from their by colonial borders their homelands, but they are in lands that are sacred to them. We are in the lands that are sacred to the Wampanoag, the Nipmuc, the Massachusetts, the Abenaki, the Penobscot, Passamaquoddy, Micmac, Maliseet. You know, I can go on for 30 or so tribes that have roots here, and this is sacred land. And it's all a part of holding on to that, to the Indian Center and having that hub for community and cultural and social services.
Thank you so much. We have time for one more question. Anyone in person or virtual?
I don't have a question, but I have a comment on your last question. And the Native American tradition is the respect of our land. And, you know, the images that you show even of the, you know, Jamaica Pond, you're showing the beauty of the nature and how the Native American lived off the land. They respected the land, and their practices were about ecology and conservation. And, you know, there was a connection that the people had to the land that it was so profound. And colonization separated them from that relationship to their land and to the earth. Wouldn't it be a wonderful way to commemorate the traditions and the spirit of Native Americans if we were to create a community of people that respected the land in that same way, you know? And wouldn't the urban center for Native American, you know, bring and remind people about this land and how we need to go back to respecting it the way that we did before we ruined it, you know, in our today's society. So that's just what I was thinking as we were talking about that, the way to go back to traditional ways of farming, traditional ways of, you know, respecting our land and letting it restore, that being the memorial that we could have to the people that were here and that are here today.
Yeah, and I want to say yes, and that that cities are not an invention of settler colonialism. This architecture here of the earthen mound across the Mississippi River watershed, going into, you know, going here in New Orleans in the Gulf South, but going up to Cahokia, like there is an urbanism that existed here prior to 1619 and 1492 and any other time that someone sailed a ship to come over here. Like there were cities that were here, and yes, there were different systems of agriculture and things like this. I think one of the things that, you know, one of the critiques that we have is how the systems of value that were introduced on these lands, that then, you know, we see in sort of like reliance on like, okay, now instead of like forming relationship with the earth, forming relationship with non-human kin, now I can like take my money and go to the store. Well, not so much now that eggs are $9 a dozen, but you know, there was an urbanism here, but there was also like the colonialism that was introduced here, introduced a system of want, of like disconnection, not just by the sword or disease or anything, that by the dollar. So we have to, you know, when we're looking at futurity and futurisms, all these things, we also have to think about like mutual aid networks and what are we doing to take care of each other beyond these current systems that are completely unsustainable. So.
Thank you so much. Okay, we have one more question virtual, and I'm going to read it. Oh, I can't see it. I'm sorry. Here. I believe the speaker mentioned that Indigenous children were taken. An analogous thing is still occurring with students. I could discuss an example of this, but it can't be done via chat easily or comfortably. These things are difficult to talk about.
Yeah, and this is why, again, going back to Nina's point about why it's important to have urban Indian centers, because we have people that have been disconnected from parents, disconnected from grandparents, disconnected from generations, and we need the spaces of urban Indian centers to come together as community so that there is a safe space to start to open up. These are very, while you see in resistance, you see smiling faces, these are very heavy stories about generations that are lost and identities that are lost, languages that are lost, everything. And so we need to come together in community to provide the space to kind of go through these types of stories, kind of understand what is still happening in our schools today.
Thank you so much. We are a minute past the hour. I'd like to thank everyone who are joining us virtually and in person. Thank you for participating, engaging with us, engaging with our speaker. We look forward to seeing you in early April for our next MLK Scholar, but please complete the post-event survey, the QR code if you're here in person or via chat. And to learn more about different events through our office, Institute Community and Equity Office. Please enjoy the rest of your afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Good catch.